انتوا how's everything؟
والله تمام، بس وضع الكورونا في البلد مش أحسن إشي كمان
Are the
صراحة.
cases increasing؟
Yes.
كتير؟
كتير قوي. صحيح.
مصر كمان. مصر is really bad.
في كل مكان حاليا.
Yeah.
يعني يمكن عشان شتوية، بس طبعا أكيد مش عندكم الشتاء واضح يا نور.
No ما حصلش.
عندنا الشتاء.
يعني until yesterday people are on the beach and swimming and يعني ما فيش شتاء، ما جاش دبي السنة دي. Did not arrive.
طب نيالكم يا نور.
I love it and I'm not complaining خالص.
Exactly.
Okay, shall we start?
بفضل إنه صراحة لأنه نكسب وقت.
Okay, so I wanted, because we're a smaller number, I wanted
شو رأيك؟ يا نور مستعجلة ليه يا نور؟
مستعجلة لا I want to do stuff, you know, I want to be active. People are on the call with us.
Thank you for that. أكيد طبعا. بس قبل كل هاد عشان نكسب وقت أنا حابة نبلش هلا، أكيد نبلش كلنا، وأي حد بنضم لنا بعد هيك أو ما قدر يكون معنا اليوم لأي سبب ولسه مهتم بالسيشن، فحابة أقول لكم إنه السيشن رح تكون ريكوردد زي ما هلا حكينا، ورح نرجع نعمل بوست أونلاين على السوشيال ميديا عنا. مساء الخير جميعاً وأهلا وسهلا فيكم ونور كمان. حابة أول إشي أعرفكم عن نفسي. أنا اسمي آلاء فطاير وبشتغل بفكرة Paltel Group Innovation Hub as the Head of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. معظم اللي موجودين معنا already زي ما أنا شايفة وجوههم وأساميهم familiar معنا، فalready عم بيعرفوا عن فكرة، بس حابة أعطيكم in brief. فكرة هي أول corporate VC أو خلينا نقول أول corporate program بالأصح بفلسطين، اللي من خلاله مجموعة الاتصالات الفلسطينية بتوفر مجموعة من السيرفيسز، منها الانفستمنت كابيتال في بعض الحالات طبعاً وليس في جميعها، وكمان intensive high impact assistance سواء من خلال الكووركينج سبيس اللي موجود عندنا حالياً. It's a very well equipped coworking space actually لعدد كبير من الانتربرينورز والستارت ابس في فلسطين. من خلال هاي السيشنز كمان في عنا سيشنز زي هاي السيشن اللي عم نعملها حالياً، mentoring sessions, trainings, hackathons وبوت كامبس، ومرات المساعدة والدعم بتيجي من خلال الكونكشنز مع experts من مجموعة الاتصالات الفلسطينية أو من برا النتورك تبعتنا، كله بهدف مساعدة هدول الستارت ابس والانتربرينورز لحتى يكبروا their businesses و to generate revenues وأكيد to create jobs for their communities. حابة أحكي قصة تعرفنا يا نور إنه قبل سنة من هلأ تقريباً، قبل اللوك داون وقبل كل هاللي عم بيصير حالياً، وتحديداً في مؤتمر ستاب في دبي اللي بيصير كل سنة، هناك تعرفنا على أصدقائنا على ماجنت اللي هي أكبر أونلاين كوميونيتي للستارت أبس في المينا ريجن، اللي من قبلها ولهلأ ولبكرة إن شاء الله ولا مرة سألناهم عن إشي أو ولا مرة طلبنا مساعدتهم بإشي إلا كانوا دايماً حاضرين. ف thank you for that. صراحة كمان فكرة هاي السيشن إجت من الوقت الصعب والفترة الصعبة اللي عم نمرق فيها كلنا والستارت ابس خصوصاً في العالم العربي تحديداً بفلسطين وبجميع الستيجز سواء pre-seed, seed, stage A, series A and beyond. لاحظنا إنه المعظم عنده مشكلة مشتركة اللي هي الفاندريزنج، ومن هون طلعت الفكرة لهاي السيشن. مش رح أحكي أكتر نور لأنه حابة صديقتنا نور من سلام حابة صديقتنا نور سلامة من ماجنت تحكي لنا اليوم عن شو رح نحكي، تحكي لنا أكتر عن ماجنت، تحكي لنا أكتر عن حالها. وحابة أشكرك نور سلف على الوقت والجهد اللي حطيتيه في تحضير هاي السيشن. ملاحظة صغيرة كتير لكل اللي موجودين معنا إنه هاي السيشن بعديها رح يكون في عنا Q&A سيشن، فأي حدا عنده سؤال ممكن نخليه للآخر علشان نكسب وقت. نور thank you، أهلا وسهلا فيك كمان مرة. The floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Because we are, first of all, it's a huge pleasure to be here. You guys know you are one of our favorites in the MENA region, and we love working with you guys and with Palestinian entrepreneurs and Palestinian groups in general. The structure of the session is as follows. I want to make it interactive if possible. So I would like to take your questions. Basically, this session is designed to give you guys a super high level overview of the investment trends in the MENA region, and kaman to support you guys more practically with the fundraising tools that we have on MAGNiTT, which are free to use, and you can access them for free kaman to identify relevant investors for you. Afterwards, super happy to take any questions that you guys have, or if anything is unclear, bardu let me know, and we can organize with afterwards. If anybody's interested in getting onto the platform, let me know, and we can basically facilitate that for you. So let's first talk about why I'm giving this presentation and not another presentation. MAGNiTT is essentially, we're a startup data platform. Whenever my mom asks me what I do for a living, and she asks me a lot because she clearly doesn't understand, I say we are a technology startup that tracks investments in other technology startups. زي ما you would have, if anybody is familiar with Crunchbase or PitchBook or these international publications, we discovered that in the MENA region, this data is not available because people don't want to share it. And because people don't want to share it, nobody's actually putting all of this information in one place. And so you will find, when Alaa comes to do her due diligence on certain companies, a lot of information that helps her make that decision is not there, i.e., if she's looking at a transport company, how much have transport companies raised in the Middle East? How much did they exit for? What were their valuations? This kind of information is not available. وكمان we have information that supports startups with, if you guys are fundraising, there's a couple of things you need to know. The first thing you guys need to know is, are people in the industry that I am in, how much money are they spending? Is it an industry that has been positively affected in terms of the trends, or is it an industry that for some reason has fallen off the charts? In the country that I'm in, how much capital is being spent? What is the typical investment round in Palestine? So that when you are speaking to investors, you are speaking to them in this context. Who are your competitors? Who are relevant investors for you, not just in Palestine, but also beyond? These are all questions. Which investors should you target? These are all, how could you exit? These are all questions that you will have that you can generate from the platform. And I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit later, but I'll do just the big picture context data run through before we start. Kaman, important to note, and this data is accurate up until Q3. It does not include Q4. We're going to be releasing our full 2020 report in the first week of January, and there would be a free version that we can dive into these numbers more updated. But it will show us a little bit about how COVID has impacted venture funding, what industries have been positively affected, and who's been in trouble. So let me first, okay, it's changing, yeah. Okay, so this is who we are. We're a startup data platform. We have 16,000 startups, 3,000 investors, a lot of reports, a lot of people, a lot of competitors. So far in MENA, Pakistan, Turkey, we have tracked almost $5.5 billion of venture investments in the region. And what we mean by tracked is the startup, the investor, the amount, the stage, the industry. And with that data, it allows us to make certain kind of insights and reports that are informed by this data. So at a very, very high level, can you guys see your faces here when I move you? Can you see the whole presentation? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So when we look at the MENA funding evolution from 2015 to 2020, we see a very, very interesting trend up until 2019. صح? The dark is what we call mega deals. So they're outlier deals of the likes of Su and Karim and other kinds of major exits that we don't account for in the regular numbers because they're outliers. So what we find is very interesting. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to fix this. Okay, it's not being fixed, but it's okay. So we see from 2015 to 2019, we see very, very consistent growth in terms of the number of deals, how many startup deals there are, but also an increase in the underlying value of those deals. So we're seeing more money invested in more startups year over year. COVID comes and we see an interesting and concerning change in that trend. So COVID comes and we see exactly the same amount of money. Actually, in some cases, we've actually overtaken, I looked at the numbers, the most recent ones before I got on this call. We're almost at $1 billion invested in MENA startups this year. What we see is that the number of deals has taken a pretty serious nosedive. And what we're noticing as MAGNiTT up until Q3 is that investors are investing the same amount of money, if not more, but in fewer deals, which means that the capital is being allocated to what we call more mature startups. So we're seeing more investments at the Series B, we're seeing more investments at the Series C, and fewer at earlier stages, as investors look to de-risk the investment proposition amidst a concerning economic backdrop. What this does is it puts investors in quite a pickle, because the companies that they're not investing in at early stages are not going to be their pipeline 12 to 18 months from now. So it's quite a short-term solution to a very, very long-term problem. And so that's been the trend so far. And this is the first year to buck that trend, where the deals have really, really dipped. Just to put the MENA region in context, in 2019, we had almost $1 billion invested for the first time in tech startups in the venture space. When we put that in context, we are, all 19 countries in MENA are exactly the size of the Netherlands. They are not close to Asia. They are not close to Europe. They are half of Spain by itself. And we are also less than 10% of New York independent. So while we are very excited and we are growing and we're seeing more investment in this space, Kaman, it's important to put the investment in the context of how much money is invested. And a very important thing to note, Kaman, is that the purchasing power of $1 billion is very different in the MENA region than the purchasing power of $1 billion for the USA. $1 million will take you a lot farther in Egypt, Palestine, than they will take you in New York as a function of the currency. So Kaman, it's not as stark as it appears, but the currency value is different. We know for a fact that the ecosystem is evolving. Every year we see new funds being set up. We see new accelerator programs. Accelerator programs are an incredibly powerful provider of deal flow later on. But while we see the ecosystem evolving, we see certain industries that are consolidating and fragmenting. So we've started to see an increase in exits as you find what we're calling scale-ups, acquiring us. And if transport is a very fragmented and broken up industry, you see a larger transport startup beginning to acquire smaller ones, so that when they raise the round, so that they don't have to compete and they're more competitive and potentially they're more scalable. In terms of the deal share by country, Palestine is in the top 10 and actually is punching above its weight because it's a very small country. But you find that the majority of deals go to the UAE, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. This is the number of deals.
Where is Palestine?
Here.
Okay.
Here, 1%, representing at 1%.
Okay.
So 1% of the deals in the MENA region are in Palestine-based startups. That's what we measure. But when you look at the funding comparison, so here we see a pretty more even distribution. And actually for the first time ever in Q3 year to date, you saw the UAE overtaking Egypt in terms of number of deals. Egypt, as a 100 million population country, usually led in terms of number of deals, not value of deals, not capital deployed, but just the sheer number. And that changed for the first time. When you look at the funding share, the picture is very, very, very different. And the UAE takes home the lion's share of funding almost every year. There's a couple of reasons why that is, although Saudi Arabia is growing very quickly. There's a couple of reasons of why that is. But first and foremost is that a lot of startups scale here when they start to raise larger rounds. So because it acts as the hub for the MENA region, for example, in the 62%, you will find a startup that was founded in Egypt that scaled to the UAE, raised their Series B here, but because they're currently headquartered in the UAE, you'll find them in that 62%. So this has a hub and a clustering effect because a lot of startups will scale to operate out of the United Arab Emirates. You see Egypt and Saudi Arabia also taking home significant chunks, but also then there's a significant drop off in terms of how much capital has raised. One of the biggest drops this year has been, unsurprisingly, Lebanon. So Lebanon used to rank much higher in terms of number of deals and in terms of capital deployed, but ever since they've had a rough year, that has really affected the numbers in the tech startup space. The industries are also very interesting, right? So this is the number of deals per industry that are getting the highest number of deals, not capital invested. That's the next slide. So you see the top three. I mean, we've had a conversation that technology is no longer an industry because theoretically all of these guys should be technology. So we'll just ignore this guy for a second. But you find in the three highest performers in terms of industry are guys that have been positively affected by this stay-at-home COVID culture, right? So we see, for example, that e-commerce, fintech facilitating payments and transactions at home and remotely, as well as food and food delivery, are retaking the top spot. I was surprised myself that EdTech wasn't higher on this list because I feel like that you would see that concentration there. But as it stands, we're seeing, obviously, a lot of tech startups have been positively affected by COVID in terms of an increase in adoption and like a need for more virtual transactions and virtual purchasing, et cetera, et cetera. And again, we see health tech here a little bit higher than it was last year. In terms of the money invested, we are not surprised to see a very, very similar sort of distribution in terms of industry, with your sort of e-grocery, food and beverage, e-commerce, fintech taking home more money than ever before as they see and try and manage more demand than ever before. The COVID effect can very clearly be seen in this quarter-on-quarter analysis. So here we start, actually, Q3 was probably one of the lowest quarters on record in about 3 years, right? We had almost like since Q3 2019, which was a while ago, big dip in deals, big dip in amount of funding. But we started off the year incredibly strong with the highest quarter. Q1 was the best performing quarter we've ever seen in the MENA region. Obviously, I don't know if you guys remember, that was right before everything happened. So I'm not really sure what would have happened had we not seen COVID, what the funding trend would have looked like if we'd seen really a record-breaking year. But even with COVID, it seems like we're going to have a record-breaking year and we're going to break the $1 billion threshold for the first time. Monthly funding, yeah, February was crazy. Monthly funding, we really see a very significant drop-off after COVID peaked in the March, April zone. And we're seeing it still staying at a consistent low. Actually, our top 5 funding rounds were super interesting this year. We are seeing so all of them were, so yeah, UAE was top 3, Egypt ranked 1, health tech, food tech, e-commerce, delivery. The only real outlier that changes the trend is that this was a property technology group. But there's always property technology and agriculture are usually the biggest outliers in terms of how much money they raise. So when they do raise money, they make these rounds just because it's a very capital intensive business that they need to work in. Yeah, and so that is it from a data perspective. Does anybody have any questions on the data before I dig in to show you guys how you can use the MAGNiTT platform tools for free to support you guys with fundraising? No questions. Okay, let me share my screen to show you guys.
كل شيء تمام.
Sorry.
ما حدا عنده سؤال بالنسبة للأرقام والinvestments؟ طب نور، أنا عندي سؤال لإلك. بالنسبة للبنان الأرقام عم تنزل زي ما إحنا ملاحظين، والسبب هو اللي عم بيصير عندهم currently طبعا غير الكوفيد-19.
I'm sure COVID has had an impact. I'm sure their kind of economic crisis has had an impact. I'm sure the explosion has had an impact. I'm sure that, you know, they've had a really bad year.
أكيد في السنة كلها، بس خلال السنة أنت حكيتي إنه Q1 كان أعلى شيء.
Yeah.
أكيد طبعا لأنه قبل الكوفيد-19.
Because there was before, yeah.
بس combined يعني حاليا من Q3 برضه عم بحقق يعني عم في طلوع شوي.
Yes. So I think people are
Q4.
out. Yeah. So Q4 has been, so far, Q4 has been incredibly strong.
يعني في أمل، هذا اللي بدنا نوصله.
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, I
الأمل
don't know.
عم بيرجع.
Oh, it's important to see when the report comes out. It will be important to see where that money is going. Is it going in later stage deals, or is it more evenly distributed at the earlier stages? At the moment, we have definitely seen more investments in 2020. In 2020 over 2019. حتى if you compare it سنة على سنة, 2020 has seen, in terms of capital invested, it has seen almost $1 billion. 2019 had I think $793 million. The one big number that has changed is that we've seen a very significant drop in the number of deals that they are invested in, which tells you
large amount of money per start. Okay. لأنه الديلز اللي عم بتركز عليها هي Series A and beyond.
Exactly.
عشان الريسك فيها أقل.
So what we saw مثلا Q3 was a hugely interesting takeaway for us, was that the size of the Series B round and the size of the Series C round had increased by like 100%. A Series B in 2019 was 1, it's now double that. Yeah. Which means that from a confidence and investor confidence perspective, they are investing more in later stage companies to de-risk, or effectively to de-risk the investment.
أكيد.
Which is not super promising.
يعني عم بيصيروا risk averse أكتر كل الانvestors.
As risk averse as you can be in something called venture capital, you know? It's literally the whole proposition is about risk. It's interesting to see them behaving like private equity investors.
في حدا عنده سؤال؟
Hi, Noor.
هذا البارت؟
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes,
Hi.
I don't know if you can hear me well.
Yes.
Hi, Noor. This is Dream from Africa. So I have a question about, like, you talked about more deals in later stages and less deals in earlier stages. So, and you talked also about the companies that that benefited from COVID. So some of these companies were like new companies who did like some pivots, or new companies that tried to create like new products to cope with COVID. But these, according to the analysis, they didn't get really good investments, because most of the investments were for older companies who were operating even before COVID.
Yeah, I think so. So of course, there's an outlier. Of course, there were early stage investments, right? I won't ever say that there were not early stage investments in 2020. But in terms of the clustering of the capital deployed, we are definitely seeing more money in industries that have been positively affected by COVID. So your e-commerce, delivery, logistics, these guys, the guys who didn't have to pivot, who just happened to be lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time, almost.
Okay.
Rather than the
so
guys
most of them were already existing. So most of them were already existing, who were like got the opportunity to get like later stages investments, instead of like new companies that came out after COVID that like took advantage of this and were able to raise money.
Exactly. Okay. So Lisa, those guys haven't fundraised yet. I don't think. I mean, we've only been 6 months, right? A lot of investors at the moment are more risk averse, and so are looking to see traction. They're looking to see revenue. Depends on the kind of investor, طبعا, and you guys know better at Ibtikar. But it depends on the investment mandate, and if they have flexibility, what we've seen is that flexibility is driving them to go more towards investments that they are perceiving as more positively affected by COVID or less risky.
Okay, yeah, because like I thought that some investors are like still taking their time to like change their mandates or areas they're interested in.
So I think we did a research survey with INSEAD, which is free to download if anybody's interested. And that was the logic, is we were saying, what is the confidence level of investors? I mean, I always say this, whenever we look at these numbers are like 24 months in the making. There's no Series C deal without the history of that Series C deal. What we see in terms of early stage investments now are pretty much laying down the foundation and the pipeline for this report, and the next year and the year after that. For what we find a lot is that these startups are the ones who are driving these new solutions. People are not yet sure if they're like, people are not yet sure how or when they're going to invest in them. At least that's the experience that's what the data says. Hello?
Okay,
Hello?
Reem, thank you.
Oh.
Yes, Reem, كل شيء تمام؟
Sorry, I think I cut off.
Okay, أي سؤال تاني يا ريم؟
I'll just mute myself now.
Okay. Thank you, ريم. Thank you على السؤال كتير لطيف.
It's okay, it's okay. It's the...
Yes. كل شيء تمام ريم.
I think I have bad connection now. Bye bye.
اوكي نور، نقدر نكمل، واذا في اي سؤال ممكن later on باخر السيشن. صحيح.
Okay, so now is the practical part of the workshop, which is, okay, that's all well and good, and okay, I'm glad we all have this information now, but how do we actually make this information useful in our daily lives? Founders are some of the most stressed people that I know, and with good reason, and they need solutions as much as they need information. So that's what I hope to provide in this part of the conversation. So the first thing, let me just share my screen with you guys one more time. Is it sharing, guys? Ala, can you?
Yes.
Yeah, thumbs up me.
Yes.
Okay, amazing.
So,
MAGNiTT at the end of the day is a platform. One of the products on MAGNiTT that I am most proud of, and is completely free to use, is our investor applications tool. Okay, I have at the moment 106 investors and accelerators that are sourcing startups from MAGNiTT. Okay. And Reem and Ibtikar are actually very active on the platform, and they use this tool. So if you guys want to get to them, you can also get them through here. Hello?
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, you can.
شكله في حدا كان unmuted. Yes.
Okay,
Sorry
okay.
for that.
So what happens is you come here and you say, I am a artificial intelligence startup based out of Palestine, looking for seed stage funding. Okay, and it will show me all of the investors who are hosting applications on MAGNiTT, who have said that they are interested in all of these three industries. So you know that you match their geographical focus. We rank the investors in order of their response rate, so that we can drive the behavior that we want to see and make sure that startups receive a response. And I look at these numbers every week. On average, we see about 25 to 35% of these startups that get accepted to the next stage of whatever investor sourcing process there is. This is totally free to use if you have a free also MAGNiTT profile. What happens is, instead of applying to all of these investors on their websites and having to put in the same information over and over again, you basically have your MAGNiTT platform. It has all of your information, and you can come here and apply for funding directly. Each investor has their own criteria, their own value proposition, what they're looking for, what they're looking to do. And it will basically pull this information from your profile directly, so that you don't have to keep putting it in and over again. Yeah, so it'll take your elevator pitch, your funding information, your company information. I'm MAGNiTT, so I'm not going to apply to Agility Ventures, but I just want to show you how it looks and how it works. You can always edit this information as much as you want. Some investors have specific questions and have customized this application. Ibtikar, for example, are a company that have done that. They're looking to invest in companies that are 51% held in Palestine. Other investors have different, and the guys in Saudi Arabia, for example, if you're fundraising in Saudi, they will invest in companies that are willing, even if you're not based in Saudi now, if you're willing to relocate to Saudi Arabia and headquarter or domicile there, they're probably open to investing in you. So this is how you identify those kinds, how much are you looking to raise? So they look for certain kinds of information, and then you can share that information with them directly and apply to all of the investors that are relevant to you. All you need is to create a MAGNiTT startup profile, which you should all have, because anyone who's on this call, we created the MAGNiTT profiles for, we sent you the emails out. Make sure that the information that they're looking for is there, and you can dive in and apply for funding ala tool directly to these investors. That's one side of this helps to identify and connect with the investors directly. Another thing, if you're actively fundraising at the moment and you wanna figure out a little bit more, okay, I'm gonna say this even though we're being recorded. We have a fundraiser subscription that offers a free trial. So if you are able, and we will send you an email before you get charged. So if you are able to pick 7 days where you are planning ahead, you can go get the free trial, cancel it right before it renews. I know this is being recorded. And basically have access to all of this information if you center your focus on getting that information. So let me show you exactly what I mean by this. You are a startup and you're filling out your pitch deck and you're trying to build your fundraising story. Investors, first and foremost, and for you as a founder, you want to identify your competition. Cool. So you want to know, مين startups across the region who are in my industry. So I don't care where they're headquartered, but let's pretend I'm my artificial intelligence startup. So I am artificial intelligence. And I am whatever stage, okay? I can then go in, of the 16,000 startups on MAGNiTT, I can see that only 465 are artificial intelligence. I will sort them by amount of funding, high to low, just to see how much AI startups have raised historically, so I can benchmark my ask. I can also open the profiles and identify هم مين investors بتوعهم, because they might be interesting for me. And I can start benchmarking against similar funding rounds. So this is to identify my competitors. My competitors, وكمان potential exit opportunities, because a lot of early stage startups that were early stage startups in 2015 are now scale-ups who have raised, $50 million, who could potentially buy you. My other tool is to figure out how much companies like mine have raised, so that when I go speak to an investor, I'm like, well, artificial intelligence startups in the MENA region, 1, 2, 3, 4, have raised $1.2 million, typically on average at the Series A level. I'm asking for 800K to do 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's the data that will allow you to inform sort of fundraising story by helping you identify your competition across the region, helping you identify relevant investors across the region, helping you identify funding rounds across the region. You can also replicate the same exercise with investors. So we have 2 kinds of investors on MAGNiTT. One is investors who are running applications, and the other is just the investors on the database that you can also use if you want to apply to them externally, not necessarily on MAGNiTT. As well as the historical exits. You can dig in, but this data is self-serve, right? So you can dig in to see, for example, all funded Palestinian startups. So if I want to see all funding rounds in Palestine, or all investors in Palestine, we can do it from here. We can sort them by amount raised, high to low, based in Palestine. And we can start identifying trends, see when they were raised, the most recent rounds, who the most active investors recently were. So there were 94 funding rounds that we have recorded on MAGNiTT in Palestine. This is all information that helps you kind of build out your pitch deck and be relevant to investors and be well informed when you're speaking to these investors, that will show them that you've basically done your homework on the space and you understand the landscape. And if you know what 7 days, you can get your free trial, dig into those numbers, and then cancel it. So that's my practical part of this session. Is there anything that anybody, oh, we have things in the chat. Is there anything that anybody would like to know that I have not shared? See in the chat, can you share the link with us, please? Yes, I can, of course. MAGNiTT.com. You guys should all have a MAGNiTT profile. So you should be able to log in and make use of all this stuff, free and potentially free, immediately. The investor applications will always be free. And so that's a really great tool to engage investors. Because we know that they will see you, and we know that 35% last week, 25% the week before, will usually get accepted to the next stage if they're relevant, which is why we introduced the data filtering and matching tool.
حمزة yes الميتينج كله recorded وراح نحطه على السوشيال ميديا بعد ما نخلص.
Can you just remove the terrible part where I was talking about?
ما تقلق all set. مش عارفة شو بدنا نعمل فيه لأنه في النص بس بنحاول. يعني نور thank you عن جد على الجريت تيبس وعلى الريسورسز اللي اعطيتينا اياها الانفورميشن انسايتس كله في نظري مفيد للانفسترز as well as للستارت ابس مش بس للستارت ابس. عن جد شكرا كثير من كل قلبنا وحابه اشوف اذا في حدا عنده اي سؤال.
أنا عندي
الموجودين.
مرحبا.
اكيد امين تفضل امين.
هاي
كيفك؟ أنا حضرت الورشة هاي تقريبا قبل بجوز بشهر 3-4 مع بدار وعملت البروفايل على المنصة، بس فعليا انتهينا أكثر بالتطوير. بس حاليا يعني عندي سؤال إنه مثلا بعد ما نقدم لحدا من المستثمرين هل بنكمل على المنصة ولا بصير التواصل؟
No. So what happens is we facilitate the first step, the first meeting. After they agree to take you on to the next stage, if they're like, yes, this investment makes sense for me, they will typically send you to, please send us your pitch deck directly on kaza kaza. They will take you off the manasa and you will start connecting with them directly or through their platforms. And then you come back to MAGNiTT if you have a funding announcement. So if you have an investment announcement that you want to share to the community, that's when you come back to us.
تمام. طب كمان ببين على المنصة يعني مستثمر ما كم عدد المشاريع اللي قدموا له، كم قبل كم.
Yeah. So from the investor database, you can sort them by how many investments they have made. So you can see them.
نور هاي في الفري ترايل بيقدروا ياخدوها ولا؟
Yeah. So you can go in and you can sort the investors by the number of investments. Lisa, we're working on getting more specific and helping you مثلا dig into how many the most active investors that are in industry kaza or country kaza. For now, we rely on the free reports to present that kind of information. So also if you're interested in downloading research reports, there are quite a few research reports that we have available for free. When you go to MAGNiTT's research, you can filter by free reports and you can start identifying, because if you go now and you search for most active investors, you will probably find most active investors historically. Most active investors historically is not necessarily relevant to us today in 2020. Just because it actually sometimes means that they've used up almost all the money they have available, which is why the reports are an incredibly useful tool to figure out, because they're time bound, to figure out at the A they're investing in this time period that we're talking about.
تمام. شكرا نور.
My pleasure.
شكرا أمين. طب أمين أنت وصلك رد من الانفسترز اللي حكيتهم عن طريق MAGNiTT بلاتفورم؟
لا أنا فعليا ما تواصلت مع حدا.
ما
عملت حسابي من أشهر بس لا انتهينا بتطوير
هذا
المشروع
الوقت لنرجع نفعل الحساب
إن شاء الله.
إن شاء الله. طب في أي حدا تاني عنده أي سؤال؟ طب نور، أنا عندي لك سؤال.
Yes, please.
بتقدري تحكي لنا عن success story لحدا كان على ماجنت صار التواصل بينه وبين الانفستر وخلصوا الديل؟
Yeah, but I can't say who they are because they haven't disclosed it yet.
اوكي.
بس we know.
احكي لنا القصة كيف صارت وكيف بلشت
So
على
I don't know the القصة قوي, but I know that from the numbers side, I know that there are 5 investments that we know about in the last quarter that they initially met on MAGNiTT. We are trying to be the data matching platform for the investor and the startup. صح؟ فإحنا what we're trying to do is make sure that the startups have access to relevant investors to them. We try and make sure that they get an answer. And at the same time, for the investors, we try and provide them with startups that meet their investment criteria and that make sense for them. So we know definitely of 5 in the last quarter that have raised funding. What happens is it's instead of applying على platforms بتاعتهم or sending them an email, this is something I know because I work with them. This is something I know that they built into their processes. So they have a deal meeting based on the pipeline that comes from MAGNiTT. And just for everybody's reference, every month we send the investors an update of the most active ones. So suddenly at the end of the month, our response rate goes from مثلا 10 of them at 100% to 35 of them at 100%. So we're trying to guarantee an answer within a month. That's what we try and do.
قديش كانت الانفستمنت في الشركة اللي عم نحكي عنها؟
All early stage. So they were all between
early stages.
$250,000 to $850,000. احنا typically what you'll find انه في later stages they're no longer using deal flow tools like MAGNiTT. They're working more closely and directly with their investors على طول. It's smaller ticket. وكمان we don't just have investors. we have seasonally accelerator programs. There are accelerator programs that are industry specific. There are accelerator programs that are country specific that are constantly running. It's good to just keep checking to see what's happening. We also try and share on MAGNiTT's news announcements. So for example, today we opened a new one. We had a new application that we just hosted for early stage companies. So we try as much as possible to bring and centralize as many opportunities and direct access to those opportunities as we can. Facilitator.
Wow. أكيد يعني دور كتير مهم. نور، طب على منصة ماجنت مين أكتر ناس في الوطن العربي عم بيستخدموا هاي المنصة؟ من وين جايين؟
UAE definitely. I think because
عشان you're based هناك ولا علشان؟
Yeah, I really think because we're based هنا. Because that's where MAGNiTT, okay, MAGNiTT started really covering only the UAE. It expanded to cover Saudi, it expanded to cover Egypt, MENA more broadly. We expanded to Pakistan, we expanded to Turkey. But still, you'll find the highest penetration is in the UAE and Egypt as numbers. Also, Egypt makes sense. Again, it's 100 million people. We are big numbers in everything. There are so many of us. But UAE is actually probably one of our most active. وكمان it's because of the hub and the clustering effect. You find a lot of investors here that are investing everywhere. You find a lot of startups here that used to be in other MENA region countries. Saudi is really one of the fastest growing.
I was about to ask على السعودية حاليا.
Yeah, so their numbers are growing at 100, but their baseline was smaller. So even though they're growing at 100%, but they're still, the UAE has been doing this for a really long time. Saudi Arabia recently ramped up its efforts in terms of and looking at the venture space. So we're seeing them growing very, very quickly, but as an absolute number, لسه they're, and we see it in the country comparisons. They're number 3 in both number of deals and capital invested. At the rate they're going, I don't think it's going to be if they continue growing at the rate they're growing, I think they're going to overtake Egypt soon.
Okay. Interesting. طب نور، ما بعرف إذا ما حدا عنده كمان. أنا أخذت كل الأسئلة، أنا بحب هن كمان
Oh,
يسألوا
I think we have 2 questions in the
الموجودين.
chat.
لحظة لنشوف. ماج بليز تفضلي.
Hi, Ella.
هاي ماج.
Hi, Noor.
Hi.
Noor, I didn't meet you, but I heard wonderful things. So I have a couple of questions about your platform. The first one is, does MAGNiTT verify the information startups actually apply? So you guys are sure, like it's a credible startup? You can like, are you credible resource or a pipeline for startups?
So for sure, okay, I'll tell you. It's a tricky question. It's also a fantastic question. For our venture reports, for any report that we push out, we have verified every single funding round that is in that. We have verified it on the back end. The next step of this is to include like a little blue tick at the front end so that you can identify which funding rounds uploaded by startups are verified or not. Typically, what happens is it requires double opt-in. So if Meg startup says that it raised money from Kaza investor, Ala, as the investor, has to confirm this is correct. Yeah. So we are very aware, like if you have tagged an investor, they have seen it, and if they haven't said, hey, that's not mine, it's usually correct.
Yeah, that sounds great, but I was wondering, I'm not playing the startup or the entrepreneur part, I'm playing the investor part. So I was wondering if I am going to use you as a pipeline for startups to invest in, for example. Okay.
Yeah. So we cannot know. So what we do is we rely on this double opt-in community credibility. If the startup is applying to you, we cannot verify that that information is correct beyond the fact that it exists on their profile. Not yet. I mean, we're moving to the blue tick and H1 or the green tick or whatever the tick is going to be colored, but to be verifying those funding rounds in particular. Because we don't ask for their kind of cap tables yet. We have their pre-money valuations at an aggregated level.
That makes sense, but I wasn't asking about the valuation. I was asking that like these startups they do have the traction they claim on your platform. They have all of the stuff that they actually prepared on your platform. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. So for the funding rounds, we verify it from the back end, and that verification will be evident on the front end. In terms of the financials and the data that they share with you, we cannot guarantee that that is correct. We facilitate these interactions.
All right. So my next question is going to be, what exactly do you offer like investors or like angel investor organizations or VCs or any kind of investor that is on your platform?
So angel investors as individuals, we have not rolled out the investor offering tool yet. We're working mostly with institutionalized investors, your VCs, your accelerators, your angel networks. Depending on what you guys are looking for and the kinds of programs that you're offering startups, we are happy to host the application to provide a startup sourcing deal flow tool. We also provide, for those who are hosting applications on MAGNiTT, aggregated data from the applications month over month. Again, that's the 100% ranking. And depending on what you guys are looking for, we have a bunch of different subscriptions, depending on whether you're looking for startup sourcing, startup support, doing your operational DD or your business DD on the companies that you guys are looking at.
Okay, that sounds good. So my question now is going to be, you have several subscriptions and you have like all of this valuable data because you have like a first-hand access to it, right? So I know you are selling the reports and whatnot, but why aren't you guys rocking the news?
What do you mean?
Like, I mean, why aren't you in all of media platforms? Why?
We are every report. We are every report, but that's me that does the PR, and I only have time to do PR around report time.
But I mean, what if you like some of these free reports, they were accessible to people to be sharing from your platform, and therefore like you being the reference platform for this. Like, I mean, since I have been in the ecosystem for like a couple of years, and it's like the second time I hear about this. So
Oh my
haram,
God, yeah.
you know?
Yeah. No, I mean, we do a lot of we do a lot of PR positioning outreach. Our reports, I think, are the reference point for the region's ecosystem. So, and I think the more people that are introduced to us, the more valuable our data becomes, because they become, it's very shared, right? Like if you
Yes.
are an active investor that is using our data, you want to be featured in our reports and credible in our data, and so you will then come and share that investment information with us.
Yeah, I just love the idea of the startup that you guys have. MAGNiTT is such a cool idea, and I would like to be referencing you guys whenever I want to like give startup advice or actually like discuss investment.
Cool. I think we should connect offline, and I can send you my email and we can chat.
Sure.
We can set up. Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks.
Meg, don't worry, بعطيك الكونتاكت انفو. زي ما قلتي صراحة في كتير انسايتس ممكن تاخديها، ترندز، شغلات كتير مهمة للستارت ابس وحتى لنا للانفسترز على هالبلاتفورم صراحة. Thank you على الجريت questions يا ميج، وثانك يو نور على الجريت answers. نور، في عنا سؤال من فراس أبو نمرة إنه في برومو كود للترايل account.
No, you just yeah, it's just a free trial, and you got an email the day before it renews.
Okay, يا فراس. I have already profile and no trail account. يعني he's saying إنه he has already a profile.
Yeah, you can just upgrade.
No trial. He can just upgrade or use the trial.
Yeah, so if
the
you
free
go to
trial.
the pricing, if you go to the pricing page, there's in the fundraiser one, there's the free trial option. So if you go here, you'll find a breakdown of everything that we do in terms of the value of each partnership. But you'll find in the fundraiser, instead of subscribe now, it says free trial. So you just go to free trial directly. You input your credit card information, you activate it, and then if you want to cancel it, you cancel it.
Cool. ما بعرف إذا ما حدا عنده أي سؤال. أنا حابة أسألك شغلة نور، من خبرتك ومن مشوارك مع ماجنت. الوضع حاليا معظم الشباب عم بيمشوا أو عم بيواجهوا شغلات كتير صعبة، challenges كتير صعبة، خصوصي during الكوفيد-19 واللوك داون اللي عم بيصير كل شوي. شو رأيك يا نور؟ هل is it wise to pivot في هذا الوقت ولا to just wait?
Pivot from or to what?
From a product وممكن يغيروا كل البرودكت تبعهم، خلينا نقول البزنس موديل تبعهم، شغلات معينة ولا
صح. It really depends on what's the original product and the original business model.
True, it depends. True.
We're seeing, in my very, very humble opinion, صح? We're seeing a new version of the world, right? Where we are suddenly, there's the fintech is now suddenly seeing more an uptick in demand that I never could have imagined. And again, I'm Egyptian. I have never in 5 million years thought that the Egyptian government was going to transact online. And now
while tourism مثلا
بالضبط, while travel and tourism suddenly تنيلوا basically.
صحيح. للأسف.
So there are these guys where effectively, what are startups about? Startups are about adding value where there wasn't value added before. But it's not about the product, it's about what's the pain point. If we are solving a pain that no longer exists, that we don't think will exist in 6 to 12 months time, then for sure we need to pivot, right? COVID-19 is also survival of the fittest, right? It's who comes out of it, who survives at the other side. We know so many companies that have shut down. We know so many companies that have let go of the majority of their staff because it's so expensive and because they were really, really impacted. بالذات travel and tourism. But there's other people who are in fintech or e-commerce or edtech, or actually another one, which is like a meditation app بالعربي. Like suddenly there's a new world, there's new pain that we face as consumers. How can we solve problems for people. That's what we ask as a startup, is how can we profitably solve problems and make people's, especially tech, how can we make people's lives better? Those lives look a little bit different now.
True, very true. يعني هذا السؤال كان on behalf of one of the startups بس I hope إنه الجواب كان relevant بالنسبة لهم. أوكي، إذا ما في أي حدا عنده أي سؤال لنور قبل ما نختم.
إذا بس
تفضل يا ليث. أكيد
ما عندي سؤال، بس
أنا مستغربة لهلا إنك ما سألت.
أسئلة الفكرة كانت كلها عندك لا عشان هيك. بالعكس أنا حبيت أشكر كل المشتركين معنا اليوم بهاي الورشة.
أكيد.
وحبيت أشكر نور بشكل شخصي على كل الوزدم اللي أعطتنا إياها من كل خبرتها في المجال هذا من عملها في ماجنت وإيش عم بيصير معها في الريجن والوزدم هذه. I think it's يعني شكرا كثير لوقتك كمان نور ووجودك معنا اليوم.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope it was a useful session. You guys have my contact details, so if you want to share them with anyone afterwards, if someone wants to email me directly, I'm super happy to help. And I'm excited. I mean, all of these numbers, and I'm still super excited about the tech space. It's why we do what we do, because we believe in the fact that we can make the world a better place through the work that we do.
شكرا لك كمان مرة، وإحنا معك في هاي الجيرني. يعطيك العافية.
Thank you. شكرا كثير نور من كل قلبنا على وقتك وعلى كل شيء، وشكرا لكل اللي كانوا معنا اليوم. إذا بدكم أي شيء إيميل فكرة هيو في الشات هلا حطيناه. هي فكرة basically فكرة @battlegroup.ps. إذا بدكم أي سؤال، إذا بدكم كونتاكت نور، إذا بدكم أي مساعدة، إحنا هون جاهزين لحتى نجاوب على أسئلتكم. وأكيد بتخيل نور منمون عليها كمان في كم من سؤال حتى لو بهذا السيشن.
Yes.
Thank you so much نور. Thank you so much للكل. شكرا كثير. مع السلامة.
باي
باي باي. سلامات.